Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Palamita. I will be your host for today's show. And today's show, we're going to be discussing America in 2040, still a superpower. Now, this is a very important topic, especially if you're in the financial planning area, you're a certified financial planner, or you're a wealth manager, because 2040 is just around the corner, like 15 years from now. And a lot of the projections you do are 10 years, and during the next 10 years, we're going to run into some serious stumbling blocks, such as Social Security Trust Fund running out of money around 2033, Medicare Trust Fund running around out of money at the same time, and of course the national debt exploding to over $50 trillion. So this becomes a very serious question. What should you do to defend yourselves from the potential collapse of the American empire, which may be before 2040? Well, with that, we actually have today the author of the book, America 2040, Still a Superpower, the former Comptroller General of the United States, the Honorable David M. Walker, who can explain to us, show us in order, whether or not the U.S. will be around in 2040. So, David, it's a big problem I have when I'm doing financial work for my clients, and I'm going, in less than 10 years, you may have an implosion of the U.S. economy like we've never seen before. At least we haven't seen anything this drastic since 2008, which was predictable by the people who wrote the book, The Big Short. And we haven't seen anything like that since the Great Depression. But I'm not sure if we're going to get to 2040 without the implosion, especially the way the financial situation in the U.S. works. So talk to us, give us some encouraging words of why we're going to survive past 2040.
Well, it's good to be back. Let me first provide some contextual sophistication on what does it mean to be a superpower and what's the theory behind the book. And I'll also talk about some recent current events, because there's a number of recent current events that are very consistent with what I predicted in the book. And the original version of the book came out in September of 2020. It's been updated a couple of times. The latest version came out last year. And it's been very prophetic, quite frankly, in many ways. Let's start out with, what does it take to be a superpower? To be a superpower today, a country has to have global economic, diplomatic, military, and cultural capabilities and influence. After World War II, there was only one country that met that criteria, and that was the United States of America, because while the Soviet Union was a great military and diplomatic power, it was not a great economic power, nor did it have significant cultural influence around the world. In recent years, we've seen the rise of China. China clearly is a global economic power. It clearly has global diplomatic influence. It has a large and growing military capability, but it's not global yet. And it does have significant cultural influence around the world. So on one hand, you've got U.S. is still there. You've got China, who's rising, and you've got Russia, who's got more than its fair share of problems, in large part because it has a much greater demographic problem than the U.S. and China, although both the U.S. and China also have a demographic problem as well. The theory is that the greatest threat to the United States is not some foreign power. It's not our own people, as some people would assert, but it is the lack of fiscal responsibility. Every major power over time has declined, and in many cases fallen, because it lost control of its finances. And whether you go all the way back to the Roman Empire, whether you consider Spain, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, et cetera, or even the Soviet Union, they lost control of their finances. And if you lose control of your finances, then you'll lose the ability to fund a strong military capability. You'll lose diplomatic influence around the world, and you'll lose cultural influence. The United States is, as I said, still the leading superpower, but it has lost control of its finances. and it needs to regain control of those finances if it wants its future to be better than its past, and if it wants to remain the world's leading superpower in 2040. Look, the U.S. is not going away. That's not the issue. That's not the prediction. The question is it, what condition will it be in domestically, and how will it be viewed, and how effective will it be internationally? Most recently, we see the 25th Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Beijing. And guess what? That's very consistent with what was in the book, where I predicted that there would be an alliance against U.S. interest economically, diplomatically, militarily, and culturally, led by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, which group would be expanding over time. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We're also seeing where India is trying to decide where it's going to be in this changing alignment in the world, and that's in the book as well. That where is India going to be? And right now things are complicated because on one hand, India borders China, and they've had border conflicts in the past. On the other hand, and secondly, it tended to be more aligned towards Russia during the Cold War. It's gotten closer to the United States in recent years, but now because of the Russia-Ukraine war, they've been buying a lot of Russian oil, which has put them on the wrong side of the Trump administration as it relates to tariff policy. And I think that's only likely to get tougher over time if Russia doesn't end up, start bargaining in good faith in order to be able to end that conflict. I said, and this is in the book too, that I thought that the Russia-Ukraine war would likely end in somewhat of a stalemate. That it's likely that Russia is going to continue to occupy large parts of eastern Ukraine, while Ukraine won't agree that it's Russian territory. They may just stop fighting. That may be combined with some type of security guarantees. It also may be combined with an agreement that there'll be a new election new elections in Ukraine. Let the people decide whether they still want Zelensky or not, but at least have new elections. At the present point in time, Putin is clearly not serious about trying to negotiate in good faith to bring an end to this conflict. And the idea that Zelensky would go to Moscow to be able to negotiate with Putin is a non-starter. I mean, if Putin really wants to have negotiations, it needs to be in a neutral third country, not in Ukraine or in Russia. Since most recently on the fiscal front, we had the One Big Beautiful Bill Act pass, which was the crowning achievement of the Trump administration to date, other than border security, I would say. And that bill, unfortunately, is projected to make the long-range fiscal situation worse. It's also projected to accelerate the exhaustion date for Social Security and Medicare and increase the amount of cuts that would have to happen absent reform of those two programs. Trump argued, the projections that said that it was going to end up costing more money were lowballed economic growth, didn't consider lower interest rates, and didn't consider the impact of tariffs. Well, since the last time we got together, the courts have ruled that a number of the tariffs that Trump had proposed to impose that weren't negotiated with the other countries are beyond his power, and therefore are scheduled to be rolled back on October 14th, 2025, unless the Supreme Court upholds them. Well, that's interesting, because if you look at who agreed to tariff revisions, there are some important ones there: the EU, the UK, Japan, others, but those were agreed to, so they can stay in effect. On the other hand, some of the ones that were less desirable to be able to enter agreements, including China and India, they may end up having their proposed increased tariffs eliminated because of the court decision. And we'll just have to wait and see. The Congressional Budget Office had come out and said that if all of Trump's tariffs stayed in place for 10 years, that they could raise up to $4 trillion, which would pay for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Doesn't look like they're going to stay in effect for 10 years because it's not just a legal issue. It's a matter of whether or not Congress would allow them to stay in effect that long. But keep in mind this, no matter what, we're running $2 trillion a year deficits. Even if you get another $400 billion a year through tariffs, you're still short $1.6 trillion. And debt to GDP is still rising rapidly. Another issue that's economic that's in the news is the Federal Reserve, increasing pressure on the Federal Reserve to reduce its discount rate. Recent numbers have come out with regard to unemployment, 4.3%. Inflation is still around 2.7%, which is higher than the Fed's target is, but much lower than the 9.1% in June of 2022. There's still uncertainty with regard to what the ultimate effect of the tariffs are going to be on inflation. My personal view is it's likely the Fed's going to end up reducing the discount rate 25 basis points, maybe 50 basis points, but more probably 25 in September. And we'll see where things go from there. And then last, but certainly not least, is, I wear many hats, and you can see I change them a lot because I'm follically challenged on the top of my head. That and a teenage daughter a number of years ago is what did it, but I won't go there right now. And so Constitution Day is September 17th, which is a week from Wednesday, the week from this Wednesday. And there's going to be a major announcement on Constitution Day. One of the hats that I wear is I'm chairman of a not-for-profit called the Federal Fiscal Sustainability Foundation, which is dedicated to trying to achieve a constitutional amendment that will restore and sustain fiscal responsibility in the United States. It could take many forms, but one of the more likely forms is to provide a credit card limit on debt to GDP and a lower target of debt to GDP than we have right now that would be achieved over the next 10 to 15 years with milestones and enforcement mechanisms. That foundation that I head discovered 3 years ago that there were enough state applications for a convention of states to propose a fiscal responsibility amendment under Article 5 in 1979, and Congress never did anything. One of the reasons it never did anything is it didn't assign anybody responsibility to receive, store, and count these applications until 2015, January of 2015. Well, earlier this year, an official, nonpartisan, intergovernmental state body called the National Federalism Commission entered into an agreement with the House Judiciary Committee to be able to bring their records up to date. And I'm pleased to say, and there will be a press briefing on this at 11 a.m. in the House Budget Committee hearing room involving the chairman of that committee, myself, and the executive director of the National Federalism Commission, Bruce Lee, to announce the results of their review in connection with fiscal responsibility applications. And the results will, number one, confirm our finding of over 3 years ago that Congress should have called the convention in 79. Since then, debt has gone up from less than $1 trillion to over $37 trillion and rising rapidly, and the dollar has lost almost 80% of its value. It's time to right this wrong. I will be calling for the convention to be called once that is announced. Secondly, it will also note that we crossed the goal line again in 2016 and 2017 and had an adequate number of applications at that point in time, which was after the method was established in 2015 to receive, store, and count. And so therefore, enough is enough. It's time that we call this convention. If Congress wants to propose its own amendment for ratification, as it did in the case of the 17th Amendment, which is direct election to senators, there would have been a convention back then, but it was mooted because Congress ended up proposing its own amendment, which was subsequently ratified. If it wants to do that, then fine, but doing nothing is not an option. They are mortgaging the future of our country, our children, our grandchildren, and future generations. That's irresponsible. It's unethical. It's immoral. It must stop. That's enough of an intro, I think. So let's have at it.
That's a good start. I'll start bringing our panelists on. But like I said, for the certified financial planners and wealth managers around the United States, around the world who are watching this, it's important, especially when you're developing 10-year plans, that you find out in about 7 years, your country goes down the toilet. And there's not much you can do about it right now, unless, David, you actually do something about it. But with that, we're going to bring in the host of the Wall Street Hackers. We're bringing in Peter Bennett, who has some thoughts relating to this area. And Peter also has a law degree from the University of Miami, a bachelor's degree in UCLA in economics, and he spent 17 years working in New York City on Wall Street after he received his MBA from NYU. So, Peter, what do you have some thoughts on this? As I do financial projections for clients, I look at a big gap, that $125 trillion gap that just hits us bad in 2033 approximately. So what are your thoughts?
125 trillion when you're counting unfunded liabilities from the United States. So a few points about what you said, David. One, I strongly feel that Trump was right. President Trump was right about the low ball from the Office of Budget Management. You know, I did my MBA study back in Reagan times, and it said and predicted correctly as that just like the Kennedy cuts, just like the Trump cuts, the tax cuts stimulated the economy, and OMB doesn't seem to acknowledge that at all. Plus, they're not counting the tariff income. But a few points about the tariffs. You mentioned one. I think the Supreme Court probably will go along with the tariff power, but if they don't, I saw this in a different article on finance that President Trump can do very similar things by going industry by industry. So he can get around this ruling by saying, okay, you know, we'll go after steel, we'll go after auto, industry by industry. So I think if the Supreme Court is right, because tariffs are very important because we have so many fiscal problems. So I have multiple questions. Nick, very quick question. How many panelists do we have? Do we have other panelists behind me, or is it the three of us today?
I'm glad you asked. We have 1, 2, 3 more behind you. So
okay, great.
Can I
tells me how much time. So here's some issues that I have. Number one, on Wall Street Hackers, I struggle with this all the time. You know, everybody does. It's so unpredictable, and Nick is right about the risks. So on one side, you have the governments of the United States is going to have to print massive amounts of money, as you've predicted, probably 125 trillion in present value for the debts that we've just promised, and you know we're not going to be able to fulfill. But on the other side, there's massive, also very powerful forces that are deflationary. Printing money is inflationary, but you have AI coming, which is overhyped in my opinion by far. I think it's mostly incompetent, but it is saving money. It's helping companies. Although a new study came out, 95% of companies who had AI did not make any money off it at all. They actually found that it was a wasteful investment. But it is coming. It's helping companies in different ways. It will keep growing. It's deflationary. Demographics are massively deflationary. Aging populations is deflationary by nature. People spend their money. Up to age 50, people tend to save money on average. After 50, they seem to retire. They're spending their money. That's very deflationary. People have to cut back. Also, some of President Trump's programs, one, helping energy prices down, that's deflationary, and cutting waste is deflationary in terms of the government spending. So you have these two forces, and I have one other major question too, but about 2040. But so is there a chance that all these deflationary factors will balance the massive, massive money printing, or is the ultimate result going to be massive inflation?
Well, several things. One, I think you meant to say CBO rather than OMB. It's the Congressional Budget Office that I think
yes,
the president is having a problem with. But, you know, let's provide some things in context. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act did not have any tariff legislation in it, okay? And so therefore, when the Congressional Budget Office,
No, I understand.
when it ended up doing its projection of what was the fiscal impact of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it didn't consider tariffs because they weren't part of the bill.
No, I understand. But they could have adjusted. Somebody should, in reality, that does have an effect.
Absolutely, it does. But then again, it's a little bit difficult to figure out what the ultimate impact is going to be because we
Very
don't.
hard.
Yeah,
Right.
but we don't know which ones are going to be sustained. We don't.
Absolutely.
Lots of reasons, right? The other thing is you're right that past tax cuts have ended up resulting in increased revenue. But here's what's important.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at it as a percentage of GDP, not nominal dollars. Okay. All of the key metrics that we're looking at on the fiscal front need to be looked at as a percentage of GDP. Revenues as a percentage of GDP, spending as a percentage of GDP, deficits as a percentage of GDP, debt as a percentage of GDP, interest as a percentage of GDP. That is the most intellectually honest and consistent way to be able to look at it, because by definition, revenues are going to go up because of inflation, because of bracket creep, and because of any economic growth. I mean, that's just math, okay? The problem is that we have right now is that we're spending well in excess of post-World War II levels.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's going up, but we're taxing a little bit less than post-World War II levels. And it's not projected to go up very much because we just extended the 2017 tax cuts. Now,
wait. Let me just dig in a little deeper, though, Dave, on those, because my main question is really inflation or deflation in the future. Because I'm concerned about finance, but when those tax cuts came, we're not talking about like major inflation in the meantime, because the impact was felt, a year, 2 years, 3 years later. Revenues were predicted to go down, and revenues went up. So in the end, though, it's a drop in the bucket. Let me put it that way.
The bottom line is
it's a drop in the bucket.
Correct. All right. So let's agree on that. And all I'm saying is the metrics, I think, has to be a percentage of GDP.
I'll agree to that. So is there a chance that the deflationary forces that are massive, again, AI, demographics, very strong historical demographics, in history, it's always been the case, but there's never been as much money printing.
I think we're mixing two things. Okay, I think we're mixing economic growth, okay, with inflation. The fact of the matter is, our birth rate right now is 1.62 per female. Which means that we have a declining population without immigration. Because
we do have immigration.
Because it takes 2.1. And we need immigration. We need a comprehensive reform of our immigration system. We need to maintain border security, but we need immigration, but we need intelligent immigration, if you will.
Absolutely.
So on one hand, if we don't end up dealing with that, that could end up having impede economic growth. With regard to AI, my view is that what AI is really more is better for research, for productivity.
Absolutely.
Those kinds of things. I think there is a benefit. I do think there's a risk. I think there's some kinds of jobs that are going to be eliminated. If they can be performed by AI, there'll be other opportunities that will be presented by AI.
So, David, let me just throw in. There's predictions by many by 2027, 2028, massive amounts of jobs that might be eliminated, and some companies are eliminating jobs very much. An announcement of 4,000 jobs the other day. A lot of AI programmers right now are complaining that the kids are getting out of school with AI coding, and they're finding out that there's no jobs because the AI is doing their own AI coding, and the AI coders are complaining that they don't like their jobs as much because the AI is doing a lot of the work. But the point is, but it's not just mixing it, because here's the question. Is it a chance that all these the aging of the population, which is going to happen whether or not we have immigration.
That's right.
Unless we have unlimited immigration, which we're not going to have. So is it a chance that the AI and the demographic aging of America could offset the unbelievably massive amount? 125 trillion for the audience is more than the U.S. stock market, the U.S. bond market, all privately held real estate and all commercial real estate in the United States today. So it's like doubling everything. That's how much money would have to be printed if we met our obligations for Medicare and Social Security. Is there a chance that they could offset, or is it just going to be inflation and that's it?
Well, first, let's help people understand what the 125 trillion is. Okay.
Absolutely.
The 125 trillion is the sum of federal debt, both debt held by the trust funds and debt held by the public, other liabilities, including unfunded civilian and military pensions and retiree health care, and unfunded Social Security and Medicare promises. If you add all of those up, as of the end of September 30, or the last fiscal year, September 30, 2024, it was close to $125 trillion. That number is a lot bigger than the $37 trillion you hear about, which is, the total debt subject to the debt ceiling, if you will.
I say that on my show every day.
So
Everybody talks about it.
The challenge is much bigger than the politicians want.
It's amazing that the media ignores that.
Yeah, and it's growing faster than the economy. Okay, it's as is debt to GDP is growing faster than the economy. The answer is, I think some of the things that you're talking about could have somewhat of an offsetting effect, but not totally. I think, there's no way.
That makes sense to me, David. Let me ask my second question. You know what? I think you're right, and I think my financial. I've been wrestling, but I think you're right. I think my financial prediction was just solidified. In other words, I'm expecting inflation. Unfortunately, I'm expecting stagflation probably, but definitely I'm going to invest that way. And let me just throw in a second point. Then I don't want to take the whole show up, but so here's where I think that we will be a superpower. And I feel stronger about this than I do about inflation because these are massive unknown numbers. But here's my point. The rest of the world has the same or worse problems as the United States. Now, I've looked at countries around the world, in South America, in Asia, many countries, Europe. First of all, if you look at the percentage of their retirement plans that are underfunded, it's about the same as the United States. It's surprisingly the same. It's like 66% here, 55% there, 70% there. So it's a very similar situation. But when you look at the medical promises, which are really the really significant ones the United States has underfunded, that are going to be even harder to deal with because it's hard to cut that back. You see countries with largely free healthcare, not totally free healthcare. One country with totally free healthcare, but they've made these promises to aging demographics. Some countries much worse demographics than the United States. Some in Asia. So these countries with the same problems, and they promise this stuff, and they haven't maybe put any money away for the future. They haven't even put in a dollar away. And two, they have less wealth to deal with this in the future anyway. So I think that this is going to affect everybody's lifestyle across the world. But my theory is very, very strongly that the United States will be the last of the relatively successful places.
Well, first, everything in the world is relative. Okay.
Exactly.
You don't want to be the best looking. You might be the best looking horse, but you don't want to be the best looking horse in the glue factory.
Absolutely.
And the other thing you have to keep in mind is what you just said with regard to healthcare is true. Okay. There's one big difference. Those countries limit how much money they'll spend on healthcare. They have budgets. They limit. And so therefore, what's much more likely to happen in those countries is that they won't provide as generous a healthcare benefits.
No, that's possible.
Over time. Okay. In our situation, we spend almost 20% of our economy on healthcare. We have no budget cap. All right. And so, and therefore the expectation gap between what people think they're going to get and what we can afford to sustain is actually much bigger in our country than it is in other countries. So, and you are right to say that the fastest growing programmatic expense in the United States is healthcare. Social Security is not nearly as big a problem. Last thing, but it's not the fastest growing expense. The fastest growing expense by far is interest. And what do we get for interest? Nothing. Rick, I think you're up.
All right, I got three things. One, AI. Within 20 years, AI will start acting in its own interest, and it's not going to be capitalism. It's not going to be communism. It's going to be computism. It's going to be what AI wants. And apparently, at least in the near future, 20 years from now, AI will want computing power and energy to do that computing with. And it's going to distort all our economic systems. Thing two is, now Nick says the Supreme Court will probably rule against Trump's tariffs, but say we can keep the money that we've made so far. And that will be $200 billion so far this year. And if they rule that that money has to go back, that's a huge administrative nightmare. Plus, Trump never likes giving money back. Thing three is Social Security. People my age have a decision to consider every single month. If you're between 62 and 70, you have to decide when to pull the trigger on your Social Security checks. For every month I wait to start getting checks, the checks I get go up by $100, right? So I have to decide, like, do I think I'm going to live long enough to clean up with the fat checks if I wait till I'm 70? Or are money problems going to start, taking away some of the money from my checks? And so I should start collecting now? It's got a personal impact.
Well, let me respond. Okay. As you know, among other things, I used to be a trustee of Social Security and Medicare, and I've done a lot of work on what are some possible Social Security reforms. Here's my answer to you, Rick. What is your health status? And hold on, and what are the lifespans in your family line? Somebody's got to go on mute. My personal opinion is if you're healthy, you don't have any serious underlying disease or whatever else, and if the lifespans in your family are such that you have a good chance of having living a long time, then I would wait as long as possible to take Social Security, which is 70, because you get a greater benefit, and that benefit is indexed. The truth is, the government is not going to allow Social Security to be able to be cut 25% across the board, which is what would have to happen if you don't reform it. They're going to have to reform it. And in reality, what's going to end up happening most likely is that people who are, let's say, e.g., 55 and over are not going to be affected much at all. All right. People that are younger than 55 and people who are, higher income are going to be affected, if you will. And so I think what's going to end up happening is that, while there are going to be changes, both on the revenue side and the benefit side, I think for people your age, and I don't know exactly what your age is, but
65.
All right. Well, then the answer is I don't think you have a lot to worry about. I would make the decision based upon, what's the history of your family line, how long have they lived, and what's your health condition. And unless you need the money. Now, if you need the money, that's a different story. But if you don't need the money, I'd wait.
David, I would add what you just said, though, it's a very important point just to dig a little deeper. It also is consider if you are high income, because my theory is when the time comes and the thing is defaulting in 33, they're probably going to go after the high income people.
Well, I think, let me give an example of what I think is likely to happen there. Okay. I do believe that the taxable wage-based cap is likely to be increased significantly.
Without a doubt.
Not eliminated, but increased significantly. By the way, as it was in 1983, it was increased significantly during Reagan's time in 1983. All right. So I think that it's going to be deja vu all over again for that. But I think they won't end up increasing benefits for higher income people. All right. If anything, they'll gradually reduce the future replacement rates for high income people and increase the replacement rates for people near the poverty level. Those are some of the things that I think that are likely to be part. I think there probably will be a potential future increase in normal retirement age, phased in over 20 years. And so those are things, quite frankly, we've done before. And to a great extent, it's going to be deja vu all over again. But the longer that we wait, the bigger the changes have to be, the less uncertainty, and my biggest frustration is I think we can reform Social Security and exceed the expectation of every generation of Americans. We should have done a long time ago, and we should do it as soon as we can. Okay?
Yeah. Dr. Sharif.
Yeah, thank you. This is very good discussion and definitely futuristic discussion. Just I want to add some point. I am not against the issues of tariff because I can understand the US economy, especially how Peters and David Walker discuss about tariff and all of the things. This is very clear. But in South Asia, where I live, we make our economic plan or strategy based on spirituality, based on futuristic things. So I write a book. It's called Silk Road 3.0. If I am an economist of USA, let's say I'm in David positions, I definitely go for long-term strategy and definitely short-term strategy for USA. I am observing USA in some point through tariff and all of the issues, they get something or they gain something through their tariffs and through competition. But in a long run, honestly speaking, USA actually losing their position. Question is how? If you see after the tariff and all of the things, if you observe the South Asian or Asian market, China, India has a lot of competitions. But after all of the tariffs and everything, Russia, China, India, or all of the Asia Pacific countries, they come close. I want to give thanks to Trump. But what is the impact? We are observing, okay, USA has a lot of trade issue, debt issues, and all of the things. But in terms of cooperations, how to make collaborations with emerging economy, I see there is a clear misrepresentations, clear gap in between global north, in between North America and South Asia. If I am in David Walker positions, I always want to invest in emerging economy and the young populations. If you see country like Bangladesh, India, or China, they have around 60% youth. The youth is the futures. And if you invest in the youth, let's say you have all of the tech giant, and all of you discussing about AI and the new economy and all of the things. If you invest in your tech company, invest in the young population, despite all of the tariffs and competition and the war, you gain more outcome. Let's say 100 emerging economy. You more invest in AI, more invest in the young population, more invest in the emerging economy. You can easily gain $200 trillion very easily in 5 years. Very, very easily. What China is doing right now, what India is doing right now. Russia, they are using their money for wire and all of the wrong things. But in terms of long strategy, you can see that China and India will go for the leading positions because they are investing in the youth. Even it's not theory. The Silk Road 3.0, if you see the Adam Smith, what I'm discussing about India, eastern part of China, and Africa will be the future of the global economy. That is the future of the global economy. And previously, they were the richest communities. So if you when like USA impose all of the tariff, that time China opened for African market, right? India opened for Bangladesh markets. And we are also launching this IIT issues, IIT Kanpur and World Talent Economic Forum. We are developing 500 startups, 3,000 company coming, 30 million people are coming. So it's a big market. So honestly speaking, there is a two-way you can win the things with all of your tariff, with wire, with competitions. But reality is USA is losing through this process. On the other hand, what we believe, Karma Yoga, we do work based on cooperations. The more USA can make a cooperation with the emerging market, let's say 100 emerging market in Africa, in Asia, they can easily overcome from this business. Honestly speaking, I do not see USA has any long-term strategy. I'm sorry, but it's true.
Oh,
Thank
let
you.
well, first, doctor, let me say thank you for that. All right. And let's talk a little bit about some of the differences. A, the U.S. is short-term focused. Our corporations are focused on quarterly earnings. Our politicians are focused on the next election. Our young people are focused on the next weekend. Okay, I mean that's the simple truth. We don't have a long-term plan. That's a huge mistake. China has one. You say that India has one, whatever. We don't have one. Okay. Thirdly, you are also correct in saying that the future is about the youth, the younger people. Well, interesting, in the United States, we're in a situation where the lowest poverty level in our country is seniors. The highest poverty level in our country is youth. And because of we've lost control of our finances, we're spending more and more on seniors, and we're squeezing resources available to youth, which includes things like K through 12 education and a variety of other things. So, we need a plan. We need to be able to think more strategically, not just living for today, but helping to prepare for a better tomorrow. And if we don't put our finances in order, then we're going to have less money to be able to invest in youth and in the future, which is one of the reasons that we've got to do it sooner rather than later. Rick?
Yeah, so the boomers have all the money. 94% of privately held wealth in the US is held by people 45 years of age and older. So boomers have the political power, the financial power, and we have warped the laws to hold on to our money. And we're living longer. So it's tough. There's very little trickle down from old to young.
Sasha's had his hand up, I think.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'd like to ask you a question. Speaking about upcoming interest rate cut, whether it's 25 or 50 basis point, but I would like to remind everybody, are you aware that this year, $7 trillion of United States debt would have to be refinanced? Now, there are no lineup of governments of different countries, whether it's China, Japan, or anybody else, to buy US debt, period. So even if you will instead lower interest rates on US debt, there will be basically no buyers of the $7 trillion of US debt. How are you going to handle that?
Well, Sasha, thank you for bringing that up, because a lot of people think about the only thing the United States has to finance is its deficits. That's not true. Okay. Let's say we're running $2 trillion deficit in a particular year, which is about what we're running. Okay. But in addition to that, we've got to refinance $7 trillion worth of debt that is maturing. And if you look at the average duration of our debt, it's much shorter term than you would think. All right. And so therefore that means we get the compounding effect of interest expense. By that, I mean more debt and higher interest rates. The Fed might end up reducing the Fed discount rate, but that doesn't determine the market per se. I mean, ultimately, the market is determined by supply and demand. And there's absolutely no question that there's a reduced appetite for U.S. debt. And in fact, many people would have asked me, well, what does a debt crisis look like? I mean, what would cause a debt crisis? And I think the most likely cause of a debt crisis would be a failed bond auction, where people just don't show up, or if they do show up, they want to demand higher rates for what they perceive to be the risk, inflationary or otherwise, rather than lower rates. And in fact, I'm having to start to spend a lot more time about what happens, what would we do if that happens, because Congress has yet to take the kinds of steps necessary to prevent a debt crisis. And so now we, in addition to trying to do what we can to prevent one, we have to think about what we will do if we have one.
Let me take
Thank
a
you.
crack at that too, Sasha. So I have an answer for that. I believe that the Fed and the U.S. government will buy the debt ad infinitum. So that's the spiral we're in. But the Fed has a massive balance sheet. As a matter of fact, if you look at mortgages, I don't know today what it is, but it might be 2/3 of all mortgages is held by indirectly through the federal government, through agencies and whatever. So the U.S. has unlimited capacity to print money, and so they will not let the bonds default. As a matter of fact, my theory is now, as the second point, is they're probably going to hold the line. In other words, they'll draw the line at 5.1 or 5.2 because they know the effects on the economy. So I think they're going to control long-term yields. And as a footnote, it's been done before, and that was in my report, among other things. The Fed ultimately and the U.S. government is going to have to use yield curve control, which has been done by Australia in the last few years, by Japan, and was done by the United States in World War II. So what they do is they say basically all bonds over a certain interest rate, we'll just buy them. So the market just gets used to it and say, okay, if it's 3%, 2%, we're going to have the line there, and we're never going to get more than that. So that's the yield we get. And if we don't buy it, the government will rebuy their bonds. Of course, this creates, in the end, money printing.
Yeah, well, let's stop on that for a second, okay? First, I think the first thing that would happen if there was a failed bond auction is the Fed would put pressure on banks to buy the debt. And there is an existing arrangement that lists, that exists at the present point in time that the Fed could try to do. All right, that doesn't solve the problem. That's a temporary thing. Okay, that's treating the symptoms rather than treating the disease. The other thing the Fed would do is if they can't force the banks to buy enough, they would end up then buying it themselves. Okay, monetizing it. All right. But, they've already got trillions of dollars worth of debt on their balance sheet. They're trying to get rid of it rather than add to it, if you will. But that doesn't solve the problem, okay? And so ultimately, I think what would happen is they would take those short-term measures, but that would not restore confidence with regard to investors. And therefore, we'd have to make a lot of tough choices with regard to spending, revenues, and other things. And we'd have to do it pretty quickly if we wanted to restore confidence. I would argue we don't want stagflation, and Peter talked about that. Yeah. That's a real risk. That is a real risk.
Hey, David, just really quickly along those same lines and everything along those lines, and I'm going to bring it down to a micro level versus a macro level, because I remember, and I mean, not that far off from Rick's age, being 63 and everything like that, that the American Muslims actually did have a business plan. And if you read like the Final Call and stuff like that, which I had the pleasure of reading, even though that's not my religion and everything along those lines, and I would say that the Mormons had a plan and certain states had plans as well. So I agree that we don't have a plan federally. So I was just wondering, in your mind, who are some of the organizations or states that the feds could use as examples? Because like I said, I remember, like I said, back in the 60s and the 70s, reading Final Call, and you would see everything from business, housing, to a number of other issues that are economic issues that those American Muslims would be talking about. But I was just wondering, and that's just one example, but I'm saying that I know that there had to be good examples on a state level as well. And I don't care whether they're red or blue. I'm just curious as to what you are seeing as good state examples of good stewardship of money.
Well, I think the state that most recently has been rated as the best managed and the best planning state, as I recall, is Utah.
Okay.
And there are other states that do a good job. I mean, I hear a lot about Washington State, which happens to be blue. I hear about Virginia, which is my state. Okay. So there are examples. There are countries that have plans, including China. Right. Who is our chief adversary, okay? And they're following their plan. And by the way, their plan includes all four dimensions of what it takes to be a superpower: economic, diplomatic, military, and culturally. It includes all four of those dimensions, all right? If you don't have a plan, all you have is prayer. Don't get me wrong. I'm for prayer, but we need prayer and a plan. And that plan needs to be future focused and outcome oriented. Without that, you know what we have right now? We're flying blind in growing mountains of debt without an instrument panel. That's the current situation at the federal level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. Hey, David, just really quickly, how much do you think our society's kind of, for lack of a better word, and I might be mispronouncing the word, but opulence and everything is hurting us in terms of trying to be fiscally responsible? Because, like I said, I am a fan of Mariah Carey, but when I hear that she's walking around New York City with $10 million worth of jewelry on her body, I'm going like, that's not exactly a good fiscal plan, and it's not good fiscal responsibility and all along those lines. I'm wondering when we see celebrities like that, whether it's her or athletes, and I'm just picking on her slightly because I heard that figure of what she was wearing to the VMAs and everything along those lines. But I just wondering, is that part of the problem, is that our users are seeing examples like that?
Well, first, wearing expensive jewelry in public in major cities is not just a bad example. It's a personal security risk.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? I mean, you know, when I go, I don't, you know, I'm fortunate that I have a Rolex watch, okay, that I always wanted one, and I bought one a number of years ago. And there are certain places that if I go, I will not show my Rolex watch, okay? And it's worth a lot less than $10 million, okay?
Yeah, there are watch theft rings.
Oh, I know there are. I know there are. Yeah, yeah. They'll cut you off.
The major engine. You talked about opulence and spending, but the credit card industry, which didn't really exist until what, 60 years ago, with Diners Club was the first one. The average credit card debt for Americans is $6,700. Until credit cards came along, most Americans really didn't have an easy way to go into debt, but now we do. And it's not great for Americans that we can so easily, buy stuff on credit.
It's shocking how many people who have a debit card go to the bank and they think just because they got a debit card they can get money. It's also shocking how many people will end up using credit cards to buy things, and if they don't end up paying them off every month, they end up paying outrageous interest rates. The last thing in the world that you ought to do is borrow on a credit card.
Well, not just credit cards, but even debit cards, because I think, David, the overdraft fees can run anywhere, because I know I've been victimized from like $35 to $50 and everything like that. So you are correct. The overdraft fees are ridiculously high these days.
Well, and the other thing is that, like we talked about AI and technology, right? I mean, you've got a lot of banks that end up, they'll clear the biggest check first.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And therefore, to drain your account balance, so that if you wrote other checks that may be smaller checks, you'll impose that fee on more checks, more revenue. Now,
David, getting back to planning, since I work with a lot of financial planners across the country, there is even a International Board of Certified Financial Planners, and we do a lot of retirement plans, estate plans, and even my homeowners association, tiny homeowners association, we had a long-term planning commission that we always commit, and we plan for like 5 years. Are you telling me right now that the U.S. Congress does not have a long-term planning commission? Is that the reality?
It does not have one. The executive branch does not have one. Even though there's a law that says they're supposed to have one, they don't have one. When I came to GAO in 1998, I'm a big believer in practicing what you preach and leading by example. And so we actually developed the first government-wide, future-focused and results-oriented strategic plan at the GAO. What the executive branch needs is different than that. But, we did that. And as far as I know, we're the only entity that's done something like that. I'm working now on an effort to try to help make that happen for the executive branch, that would end up considering what was the federal government supposed to do at our founding, what are the different authorizations for departments and agencies versus what they're doing. What are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure success on an outcome basis? If you do that, then you can do a dramatic restructuring of what the federal government does, what level of government does it if not the federal government, how to do it, how to measure success. We could streamline, simplify, and save a huge amount of money. That's what I was hoping that Doge would do. That's not what they did. That's what needs to be done.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is that out there in actuarial space, there's really good actuarial companies that we work with, like Towers, Watson, Mercer, Buck. I mean, and they have some really great software. We use a software package that isn't as good, and sometimes we use Excel. They're good enough, but not super great. And these actuaries have really good pinpointed long-term plans that they can develop. But you're telling me the U.S. government, which has trillions of dollars, has nothing.
Well, it's fair. In fairness, Social Security does, Medicare does. Okay, they're required to. All right. I used to be a trustee of Social Security and Medicare. There are 75-year projections, with a number of economic, demographic, and other assumptions for those programs. That's where the numbers come from that we referred to earlier, where you get up to the 125 trillion, right? But the federal government as a whole, I mean, what we need is a future-focused, results-oriented plan that considers all the dimensions: economic, diplomatic, national security, domestic tranquility, all those dimensions, etc. We don't have it right now.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
I just want to go back to nonsense for a second, where the places where ATMs have the highest fees are where people are drunk and crazy. That is casinos and strip clubs. They will charge you a 10% fee for getting all liquored up and going crazy.
Fortunately, I don't go to either.
Well, also they charge you big fees if you're transferring money internationally. Not only do you get cut, if you go to your local banks, they'll cut you big time. You actually have to go find brokers. Usually they're in London. So we use a London broker to clear our funds before they come to Spain. If you go directly to Spain, they will kill you on the fees using the banks. If you want to lose 5 to 10% of the value of your wealth in one transaction, use the banks. But if you want to use specialized banks, you can actually transfer funds internationally at a very low discounted rate. But that's kind of like a micro thing. The problem that I'm seeing is that on a macro basis, as I'm doing 10-year plans for clients, I don't know how to account for the 2033 depression. In other words, and right now, all of our metrics show that the United States will end up in a depression either starting it's like a hurricane's going to hit. It'll hit in 2033. Now, what are you going to do about it? You can do nothing. You could do something, but it's definitely going to hit.
Well,
right now, all our metrics say
it will hit in 2033. Your asset. What
Right?
protects you from taking the hit in 2033? Where does your money go?
Possibly the Kuwaiti dinar. It seems to be the strongest currency in the world right now, unless Sasha has a better idea. Yeah,
Well,
Sasha.
it's not me. It's people like Elon Musk and many others. I see lately a proliferation of videos, including done by Elon Musk and some other quite well-known dignitaries. That it starts very slow about talking about American economy, American debt, American Medicare, and all that stuff, and eventually it goes closer to the end. It shows you how you can preserve your capital, and not only that, you can in fact become much richer as a result of your following what they're suggesting. And of course, then it comes very quickly into cryptocurrency or some other wonderful devices. And you're thinking, Jesus Christ, what's happening with the people, first of all, I'm surprised that so people would listen to 29 minutes of all well-known events to get to the last minute that would suggest you to sell everything and go into cryptocurrency or something like that. If that's the case, if they are
Right,
right,
let me, Sasha.
just I finish in a sec. If they are right that all people have to get as many cards as possible, get them loaded with debt, buy cryptocurrency, default on your cards, so you will be bankrupt, but then you will have cryptocurrency and you will prosper.
You know what? There are well over 8,000 cryptocurrencies in existing. It's a rapidly growing number. It's been growing for years. It's most likely going to be Beanie Babies and tulips in Holland. It's got no intrinsic value at all. This would not be my answer. My answer would be you have to account for probably stagflation, and that's the most difficult investment advice to plan for because it's so hard to find the right companies, the right plans. You want to watch cash flows particularly. You want to have some money in bonds, a little bit in gold. You want to be diversified, which is the only ticket. But that's what I struggle with on my show is suggesting.
And we're struggling with our time now because we're at the hour. We want to thank our guest from the United States and around the world. We'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. We'll be here. Bye-bye.